Okay, everybody, good morning. Good morning. It's going to take just a couple of moments for everybody to join as they come through. So what you're observing right now is the host of a webinar flanneling gently until everybody manages to join. So we're just going to give people 30 or 40 seconds to do so, and then we will get going. As you listen away to this, you have the ability to ask questions in the chat. We'll hold questions till the end, and then Nick and Petronella will be put firmly on the spot with lights shone in their eyes, and we will see what we can do for that. But loads and loads of time for that later on. I'm just looking now. I think we are pretty much ready to go. So what do you say? Nick and Petronella, should we give it a go?
Let's go.
All right. Okay, let's start properly. So good morning once again. Thank you for joining. There's lots and lots of people in this webinar. Retirement planning clearly on everybody's mind. My name's Mark Paulson. I run a company called The Langcat, of which you have not heard, but that doesn't matter for today. We're industry researchers and consultants, and Nick and Petronella have invited me along today to try and keep them in order, keep things going along, and act as a host as we go through this retirement planning webinar with Investment Quorum. Investment Quorum are financial planners and retirement experts. Real pleasure for me to do this. I've known Petronella for many years, and it's lovely to have a chance to join Nick and Petronella today with you guys. And this is obviously a very, very timely topic. Retirement savings are consistently in the news, and there was a fascinating survey recently by the investment firm Investec, which said that 48% of people are concerned their pension savings won't be enough to fund the lifestyle that they want to live in retirement. And not just people are concerned, over half of people already know that they haven't saved enough for their retirement so far. And so Investment Quorum are clearly involved in wanting to help people address this. So we are going to get into lots and lots of interesting topics today. We're not going to get too detailed because it's a webinar and there's only so much you can do, but you can, of course, expect a little follow-up from Investment Quorum, and those more detailed questions that you may have we'll be able to get into at that point in time. So let's let our speakers introduce themselves. Petronella, could I start with you, please, as Chief Exec of Investment Quorum?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. I mean, as many of you know, I am deeply passionate about financial planning. I've done it for 35 years. We're very experienced in handling all these different things. And this is such an important topic for people to get right. It's an absolute minefield. It's a passion of ours. I'm one of those few people that get really excited about pensions. So really looking forward to today.
And may I see how interesting it is to see someone that entered the industry at 10 years old? Good
hairdresser, Mark. Good hairdresser.
There it is. I wish I could say the same. Nick, Director of Private Clients, why don't you introduce yourselves, please?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you here. My name's Nick Rolf. I head up the client advisory team at IQ. I would say that having worked in financial services for over 20 years now, I truly believe that this stage of life, the at retirement stage, is a time period when great financial advice is crucial and can be most impactful as well. So hence the focus of today's webinar.
Well, absolutely. And this is one of those times where if you get it wrong, you don't necessarily have time, do you, to recover the decisions that you may regret in future. So having someone with you is super, super important. So listen, everybody, the structure of today, we're going to kick off by asking Petronella what it means to define retirement, because there's no point having a plan if you don't know where you're trying to get to. So Petronella is going to take us through that. Then I'll ask Nick to bring it to life a little bit for us. And then we'll go back and forward another time between Petronella and Nick. I think, believe it or not, we did rehearse this. It took about 25 minutes, half an hour, maybe a little bit more on the day. And as I say, lots of time for questions at the end, but do please drop those questions in the chat. I can see them all. Your questions are anonymous. So I won't be saying, aha, you know, Jeffrey from Northampton says this, just in case, Jeffrey from Northampton, you're worried about that. I'll make sure that everything is anonymous. And honestly, with webinars like this, the more you put in, the more you get out. So do please get involved and don't hold back. So let's cover stage one, Petronella. First of all, why do we need to not just treat retirement as a kind of amorphous blob? What do you mean by defining it for clients?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I mean, one of the most important stages when you reach retirement isn't just to sort of dive straight into the detail. It's basically to try and have the opportunity to take a step back and look at 4 different aspects when it comes to defining your retirement. And there's basically the most important step is where we talk about kind of colouring in what retirement looks like. You know, live it, breathe it, feel it, think about it. What's it going to look like? How many you've got now? Suddenly an extra 5 days a week of free time. You know, that precious gift given back to you. And it's how are you going to spend that time? You know, in the early years of retirement, you're fit and healthy. You might want to buy a new car, a new boat, buy a new property, help your kids, pay for a wedding, and all these things that we've got listed here. And it's really, what does that look like? You know, really color it in. Think about those trips abroad. Think about how you're going to spend time in the garden, whatever it's going to be like bring it to life. And having that conversation around that is a really, really important starting point. So talking about your goals, bringing them to life, really having a think about how that's going to look and feel for you is a really important, visualizing the first step. So having kind of established that, then you really need to think about what it's going to cost. And retirement isn't just a straight trajectory of cost. You know, when you're working and you're earning and you're paying the standard costs and bills, but it's more fluid in retirement because, you know, you don't know when you might want to purchase a very expensive new dog, or your kids suddenly need you, or you decide to go on that round the world cruise, or you suddenly need to fix the boiler. And it's also about really trying to understand what that expenditure, what those liabilities are, paying off a debt maybe at retirement. So it's really important that having coloured it in, that you've got a really good handle on the expenditure and a really good handle on any outgoings and liabilities, so that you can then at least match those sort of visuals, if you like, to an actual figure, an actual numerical figure. And then we take it to the third stage, which is basically, what have I got? I like to call it your box of tricks. You know, you may have property, you may have cars, investments, you might have rental properties, you've got money in this pension or that pension, money in ISAs, you might have some shares over there, stock option schemes. Clients have so many different types of investments. You know, could it be gold coins? You know, it could be the family silver. It's really understanding what have you got that's going to equip and basically power the retirement that you really want. So understanding exactly where everything is and valuing it all is, again, a really important key stage. And then we get to the 4th stage, which is basically, you may well already have sources of income. I mean, we've got state pension running at over 10,000 a year, very valuable. Have you maximized your funding for that? You may be in the fortunate position of having some kind of defined benefit final salary. You could have worked in the NHS, could have been a civil servant, you could have worked for a big, large corporation. You know, what's that going to entail? What benefits are available from that scheme? You know, you may be drawing income from an ISA, you may have other investments. We're going to talk about offshore bonds, which is another valuable tax wrapper, rental property, rental income. But you need to understand what those income sources are going to be and how that's going to affect your tax position. So having those kind of key pillars, understanding all of that information is a really important step before you start planning and actually making some decisions in terms of around your retirement.
That's super interesting. Thank you very much, Petronella. And the thing that strikes me as you're going through that is, I mean, there's a lot there, right? And I'm not in the fortunate position of being at retirement yet. It's not that far away, I suppose. But I'm not sure I would necessarily know what my goals were. I'm not sure I would be fully equipped to walk in to see you and say, well, listen, I want to achieve this, and this in these years. Can you help me structure it? So how does that work when somebody actually sits in front of you and says, I don't really know?
Well, that's part of the skill, I think, of a really competent advisor, because a really competent advisor should be having those conversations about what motivates you at money, what's your purpose. It's, you know, we talk about kind of life coaching, but it's more around asking the right questions to get people thinking, get you thinking about what that's going to look like, you know. And I think it's just a technique around money. There's much more today around the purpose of money, the value of money, what we really attach to it. So good advisors will really help you have those open those conversations and have that, and actually stop and listen and really think about what that's going to look like. So I think it's good, competent advisors are very good at doing that. All the other bits like income and expenditure analysis and looking at all your different schemes, well, that is the bread and butter work of any good advisor. We will help clients unearth what's sitting in a box in the attic or in a drawer or online. We know which questions to ask. So it's about having a competent person to walk alongside you to help you identify all of those decisions.
I really like that phrase, actually, somebody to walk alongside you, because it is super, super hard to think critically about these things yourself. So on that note then, Nick, I'm going to come over to you now and ask you about bringing your plan to life. Why is this kind of visualization and bringing it to life important? And what's your process? How does Investment Quorum help clients do this?
Sure, thanks, Mark. So how do you bring this plan to life? What are the next steps? So once you've got a complete picture of your financial situation that Petronella has just talked about and how you intend to fund your retirement, the next stage really is to ensure that these plans are realistic and achievable, as well as stress testing these to see if compromises need to be made. And we tend to do this or bring this to life through the use of cash flow modeling that you can see on the slide now. So what's cash flow modeling? Well, cash flow modeling, it may be something, it may be a term that you associate with businesses, cash flows, but actually we find this is a very powerful tool for bringing to life people's personal finances as well. What you can see here is that this involves sophisticated software to present a visual representation of your assets and how they're being impacted over time. So we try and make this as realistic as possible in terms of both factoring in life events that you anticipate happening, expenditure items, but also in terms of assumptions that we use around anticipated investment returns and inflation rates. So I say, well, it seems great, but why do we do it? And ultimately, cash flow modeling helps you to understand how the decisions that you make now will impact upon your future retirement. And it's by understanding this that you'll be much more likely to make the right financial decisions ultimately. It can also help provide valuable insights and address key questions that you might have, such as when can I afford to retire? How much can I afford to spend in retirement without fear of running out of money? As well as how much investment risk is an important one. Do I need to be taking with my portfolio to achieve my goals? Do I need to take any at all? And also another important area that it can bring to life as well is, what's the most tax efficient way to draw on my assets in retirement? And we can stress test these different scenarios through what we call what if scenarios to help you decide which decisions to make ultimately. And when it comes to, in terms of tax planning, in terms of structuring, deciding on the optimal way to draw on your assets to fund your retirement, the first step here is to have clarity on how much you intend to draw and when. And this is why what we just talked about in terms of cash flow modeling is such a key step or stage of the financial planning process. It's likely that your assets are going to be spread across a number of investment wrappers. We can see here such as sort of pensions, ISAs, general investment accounts. I'm not allowed to say that because apparently that's jargon, but just investments. And maybe even onshore investment bonds. And having these investments spread across a number of these tax wrappers, what it does as you reach retirement is it ultimately gives you a bit more flexibility, and it allows you to take control over your annual tax liability in terms of how you draw down from these various wrappers. So we've also got a worked example here to try and illustrate how you might be able to structure your assets tax efficiently. And in this example, what we're looking at is a couple who have a combined investment portfolio of 2 million, just for illustrative examples, spread across 4 different tax wrappers. And their goal is to withdraw £85,000 a year as tax efficiently as possible. And I would note here that this example, it does assume that they have no other taxable income such as state pension or other gains from other sources, and also that they've drawn their tax-free lump sum from their pensions. So what you can see here is that they could draw up to their personal allowance, £12,570 each from their pensions, which would be tax-free. They could then utilise both capital gains tax allowances. I know that those are getting stripped back at £3,000 now this tax year, but they could draw money from their general investment accounts and say take 20 without creating a chargeable capital gains tax liability. And then you've got maybe if they'd jointly invested in an offshore investment bond, seeded originally with 200,000 and that's now worth 250. Well, you can take 5% of that original amount invested tax deferred. So they could take another 10,000 without an immediate tax liability. And then the rest from tax-free withdrawals from ISAs, therefore giving them, all of that income for the tax year tax-free.
Okay, so as you can see, lots of deal starts. Now, listen, this is a really important point to make here as we start to get into a little bit of detail and start to give some instructions, and something I should have said earlier on, that the information that we're giving you here, that Nick and Petronella are giving you, is illustrative, right? This isn't individual financial advice, and the reason it's not individual financial advice is at this point in time, you're lots of very, very lovely people on a Zoom webinar. We don't know you individually, and we don't know your circumstances. So therefore, these kinds of figures are only illustrative. Your goals and your needs and your own situation is unique. And if you want to get an individualized version of what Nick was just talking about there, then of course you should get in touch with Investment Quorum directly. We also need to highlight to everybody that when we start talking about investments, as I'm sure you've seen under every financial advertisement ever, the value of investments isn't guaranteed and can rise and fall, which interestingly is just another way of saying that they're not guaranteed. So I've never understood why you need to say both parts of that, but nonetheless, we have to. With that little health warning there, I'd like to talk a little bit more about pensions. And Petronella, I'm going to come back to you here, because anytime we start talking about pensions, things get very complicated very quickly. Successive governments, of course, enjoy playing with pensions regime, which I'm sure makes your life interesting. So talk a little bit for us about how you think about pensions when you're dealing with clients and retirement income.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, I think as Nick identified, it's more about taking that step back and looking at everything you've got before you make any decisions. So we're very lucky in the UK because the government has given us so much flexibility around how we draw our pension. And now, the sort of back in the 70s, you kind of reach age 60, put your slippers on, draw your pension, and everything would be guaranteed, and it was really easy. But now people are so fluid. People are living longer. They want some money now. They might go and do some part. You look at the whole sort of, the older generation working in either childcare, like bringing up grandchildren, or working in garden centres. People want to keep active. People want to keep doing things. Then they don't need all of their money all of the time. And so one of the great things about pensions is that most pension schemes give a wide variety of choices. And it could be simply that you want to draw some of the money out of your pension at retirement. There was this whole, when pension freedoms came, that we'd all be drawing our pension out, buying a Ferrari and zooming off into the sunset. The reality is that doesn't make it realistic or achievable, as Nick quite rightly said, because you can't spend the money all that quickly. People do have a habit of sort of thinking that they're going to live slightly less long than they do. So the really important thing is having a plan around this. But now pensions, you can have a drawdown options. You could basically take some of the money out and then park the rest. Also, I think what's so important now, with interest rates normalizing again after the debacle of the last couple of years, annuities are back on the table. Annuities form a really important part of retirement. Why do you need to have your money invested, taking loads of risk, when you could just lock in and buy a guaranteed income for the rest of your life? If you don't have dependents, that could be a great solution for you. Why bother with expensive financial advice and having to get advisors and all the stress of all of that, if actually all you need to do, give your money to an insurance company, get a guaranteed income for life. And there's so many options now on the table. If you happen to perhaps have some underlying health conditions, you might be able to get a better annuity rate. These are things that are really important to consider. You don't just have to go and invest your money in complex pension products. In fact, the regulator's very keen that everyone considers an annuity, and it could be for part of the pension. As I said, there's also the hybrid. Take a bit of cash now, leave the rest of the pension invested. You may have a part-time income. You may not be going from 5 days a week. You may be going to 2 days a week. So you've still got taxable income. You know, so the most important thing is that pensions have a lot of options on them, but that we have a tendency to kind of just look at the options, just go, there's too many pages, it's too complicated, I'm just going to tick the easy box and move on. And in fact, once you've made a decision, you can't go back. So it's really important that you've thought about those decisions before you actually do it. So it is important to stop, think about everything, all the different options, which is why we're asking people to do that step back and look at the bigger picture.
And that's really what I'm taking from this, is that it's not that there's an objectively right route, it's that there's appropriate routes for your situation.
Exactly.
There's no best generally.
Exactly.
It's only for you. And to get there, I mean, people need to think critically, don't they, Petronella? So what kind of checks should people be going through in their head as they're getting into this process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to cover all the things on the slides here, but I call this drinking the green juice. Every time, there are times in life when something you've got to do when you don't want to do it. For me, it would be drinking a kale and cucumber green juice in the morning for the goodness of my health. But the point is that this is really, really important. We do have to spend a day drinking the green juice and just really thinking about some of the key risks here. I mean, we've got clients who've had pension beneficiaries, they forgot to change it and it went to the first wife, not the second wife, or it went to the children, these children, not those children, because they had more children. There are all sorts of things around, you know, the pensions and risks around all of that you need to be thinking about. I mean, wills is a very important part of planning for retirement, lasting powers of attorney. You know, 1 in 3 of us getting dementia. And if you die and you don't have a will, you leave an almighty mess for your family. And who wants to do that? We see that as a massive risk for families. You know, it's really important that it's not just about having the right investment approach, having the right plans, but all the key risks around it. And things like life insurance or private medical insurance. More and more of us have private medical insurance. It's very expensive in retirement. How are you going to pay for it? You know, we're looking at premiums of 4,000 or 5,000 a year. People want some of that insurance. You need to have that budgeted in, that you can actually make sure you can take care of your healthcare. So there are lots of nuances around the outside that I call drinking the green juice. That's why you need to really pay attention and not just put these things away to one side because they're too complicated.
I think that's, I mean, I think it sounds horrendous, personally, the green juice bit, not the other part. And I've never understood how being really, really unhappy at breakfast time is healthy. But there you go. I guess maybe it is. But this definitely looks healthy. And those hard issues, because, you know, it's not just making a will, is it? It's the thought process that goes into making those decisions. And I mean, I've been lucky enough to see the financial planning process before, and I think it's being able to bounce ideas and use sort of drawing thinking out of people as they go through those processes. That's the sort of nub of it, isn't it, here?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, so listen, let's get back into some of the sort of design. In a way, we're going to come back to you, Nick. This is sort of bringing it to life again, but in a different way this time, thinking about the way physically that you structure income for retirement and how you invest money at Investment Quorum on behalf of clients in order to make that happen. So I'll hand the floor back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, so at IQ, we've developed more recently a retirement income solution. And this was developed with the aim of giving our clients the best possible chance of meeting their regular income requirements from their portfolios that we manage on their behalf. And its central premise is based around minimizing the impacts from the key risks that you're going to face in retirement, that everyone should be aware of. So what are those key risks? We've identified here 5 key risks, just to talk about quickly. Longevity, this is one, which is ultimately the risk of living longer than you anticipate and needing to draw on your assets for longer. There's inflation risk. Living through prolonged periods of high inflation means that you need to have to draw more heavily on your assets to meet your living costs ultimately. Poor investment selection, another one. It's important to have a well-diversified portfolio. It's not too defensive in nature, but also not too aggressive in its composition. Poor investment returns in the early years, another one. So without going into sequencing risk and things like that, that ultimately, if you're experiencing poor investment returns in the early years of your retirement, when also drawing on your portfolio, that can be very damaging. If markets go down 15, you take out 5. it's more than 20, it's 25% to get back to where you started. And then also changing circumstances. And it's important to expect the unexpected and have an emergency rainy day fund set aside. So how do we manage these key risks that you're going to face in retirement? Well, we do this through what we call our three-pot investment approach. And we decided to ditch, I think Nella did, the Bill and Ben flower pot men infographic and try and keep this pot methodology as simple as possible.
That's such a shame.
I remember that.
Less confusing. So what is our three-pot approach? Well, we feel that the best way to manage the risk that we've just talked about is through this. But before I go on to talk about how it works, the mechanics of it, I think it's important to highlight that this is not the only approach that we discuss with our clients. Firstly, as Petronella talked about earlier, there are annuities. And when a client's retirement income can be met through a secure income, such as the purchase of an annuity, we're always going to talk about this and present this as an option for consideration. Then there's what we would call the natural income approach as well. So for some clients that want to draw a modest income from their investment portfolio, say 2-3% even, then the natural income approach can be used where any dividend or interest earned within the portfolio can simply be passed straight through to the client, and you don't need to go through these pots. So where the IQ three-pot approach is ideal is for those clients who want to draw maybe above the natural income yield of their portfolio, probably edging up to 4%, maybe more. So how does it work? So once you've outlined your short, medium, and long-term income needs that we've talked about through the cash flow modelling, we're going to allocate your investments into three separate pots defined by these three timelines. And it's important to identify any known large expenditure items, such as funding a child's wedding, a new car, or a boat purchase, and any gifts that you plan to make, and to also ring fence these away from this three-pot approach, because these known expenditure items can then be matched off by investing into very low risk, say government gilts, money market funds, or cash term deposits. It's also important just to note that having a sensible emergency cash fund to cover any unexpected expenditure items such as house repairs, I would also say to keep that aside from this, typically 1 to 3 years of planned expenditure. So what do we have in there? So if we look at the short-term pot first, so in this pot, we're going to hold your anticipated income for the next 3 years. And this is going to be investing into very low risk money market funds or gilts. So we do this to ensure ultimately that those short-term plans that we've identified and planned out with you are not being disrupted by volatility in stock market valuations. Then in the medium-term pot, we are going to hold your anticipated expenditure over the years 3 to 8. And these funds are typically going to be invested in more moderate risk assets such as bonds and dividend yielding equities, with a focus more on delivering an income yield that can then be used to top up the short-term pot. And then in the third pot, the longer-term pot, is going to contain the rest of the investment portfolio, which will typically be invested in slightly higher risk equities with a focus on delivering more longer-term capital growth for you. And I would also say it's important to note here that this is very much a dynamic and fluid plan. It's not a static set up and leave and go away. So each year what we'll do is we'll review your income needs with you and the performance of the overall portfolio, and then top up the depleted short-term pot with growth from the medium and long-term pots, in effect resetting back to the original plan. Now, if there are years where portfolios are down, then we're not being forced ultimately to sell any investments in the medium and long-term pots to meet your income requirement. We can simply run down the short-term pot until the market recovers or you reach back that high watermark. And remember also you've got income from the medium pot feeding into the short-term pot as well. So what are the benefits of this approach? I would say firstly, your short-term goals are not at risk of being blown off course by market volatility. That's a key. We're also not being forced as investment managers to sell your investments to meet this regular income need at a time that might not be right. Control over the timing of when we buy and sell investments and not be dictated to by short-term noise in markets. And then thirdly, I would say that, this gives you the opportunity to benefit from a well-diversified portfolio, total return strategy that has the purpose, that has a real purpose to it, and is aligned to meeting your personal goals. One of the common pitfalls that I would say that we often encounter with people approaching retirement is that they de-risk the whole portfolio as they approach retirement. And this mistake gives you little or no chance, basically, of keeping pace of your portfolio, keeping pace with inflation over the long term. So you need to have those high risk growth assets in that longer term pot to give you the best chance of outrunning inflation ultimately. And I'll just finish by saying on this that, this approach can be utilized across tax wrappers, ISAs, pensions, offshore bonds, things like that as well.
Great stuff. And I guess that, I mean, obviously quite a lot of investment detail there. The key thing I think I got from that, Nick, is it's almost a theme that's come on from the earlier things that you've both been talking about, which is that there isn't a right answer. There's a range of things that meet the various different needs that you may have in retirement. And it struck me as you were talking about people maybe needing to take a little more investment risk than they might think. Many of us, I guess, now can spend 30 years, 25, 30 years in retirement quite easily. Not in Scotland. We do our part, but generally by dying young. But the rest of you make up for it. So I guess, having that balance across the portfolios becomes super important. Thank you very much for that. I think I'm right in saying that concludes our slides. So the main part of the content. Now, we do have some questions that have been coming in. The first of which is, can we have a copy of the slides, please? To which the answer, I think, is absolutely.
Yep.
Not a problem at all. So we'll make sure that happens. And I've got some more questions here. You haven't missed your opportunity, ladies and gents. If you would like to ask Nick and Petronella something, now's the time to pop it into the chat. I've got that up in front of me, and I'm going to start putting questions to these two legends right now. So let's start off with a question. I'll kind of read this one out, actually, pretty much verbatim, and thank you very much for it. It's an excellent question. The questioner says, I've read somewhere a recommended minimum for London or non-London based individuals based on either basic or more luxurious levels of retirement. I think I've seen this piece as well about what an acceptable level of retirement versus a more luxurious one is, and putting figures on these. It came out as around 40K for today's prices for a single person to have a good relative luxurious standard of living per year. I think that's outside London. I think it's a little more in London. Do you have a recommended number, or do you have a source that you go to try and find those kind of rules of thumb to work by? Petronella, maybe start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, because of the longevity that we've been in business, how long we've been doing cash flow models for clients, you get a very good handle on how much things cost. I mean, I kind of link it up into sort of the heating and the eating, which are the essentials, the roof over your head, the bill. I mean, it does largely depend whether you want to go and eat out in Nando's, McDonald's, or Nobu in London. I mean, your lifestyle does rather dictate whether you shop in John Lewis or whether you shop in Lidl or you shop in Waitrose, or so it is somewhat affected in terms of the kind of the heating and the eating bill, so to speak. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but broadly, when we take clients through this, it's very easy to spot if we think they've mismanaged it slightly, or they have underestimated it or overestimated it in terms of what the expenditure is. It's not for a reasonable lifestyle in retirement, somewhere between 3,500 to 4,000 a month net income to meet everything is a realistic standard, is a good standard of living. I mean, the Roundtree Foundation talks about poverty levels around 20, you know, and it's, you know, it's really difficult to get by on that number. But, you know, the more you save, the more wisely you invest, the more you can eke out that income, then I think, you know, that's a reasonably good standard of living, I would argue. And that's just based on the experience of doing many, many cash flows.
Okay, that's super useful. Thank you. Nick, I'm going to give the next question to you, if I may. I'll paraphrase this one. The questioner reckons that they'll spend more highly when they're very active in their early retirement and perhaps damp things down a little. I see the phrase potter in the garden going in here. Though if your family is anything like mine, they can spend quite a lot on plants. That's definitely a thing.
They are expensive.
Yeah, they are. They are. Are you able to provide illustrations, by which I guess the questioner probably means the kind of cash flow modeling that you were talking about, Nick, that addresses that kind of spending profile? So where, you know, lifestyles change over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it completely depends on the individual, what their goals and aspirations are and what their intentions are for their life. But I think what's key about this, what we talked about before, is that you know, everyone's different. So you need to go through and look at a very tailored tailored approach to cash flow modeling with the client and say, okay, so what are you anticipating spending, and then how can that feed through into how we manage the risk in your portfolio to deliver that anticipated income that might be fluctuating at different stages through your retirement life. And then you start thinking about, you know, your asset as a house. A lot of people have a lot of money tied up in bricks and mortar, and, you know, in later life, are you going to release some of that, or do you want to pass that on down to the next generation? So there's lots of different things to consider.
Okay, that's super useful. And I think, I mean, I've seen lots of these cash flow systems work over time, and I can tell everybody that they can certainly cope with pretty much all the complexity you can throw at them. The danger sometimes, I think, is you get into so many different scenarios that you can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. I've got a couple of questions in. I'm going to bucket them together, or yeah, well, a bucket or pot, flower pot, don't know. I'm still back on whether we're actually growing things to make the green juice from the flower pots. But such good questions on private healthcare, something that you mentioned, Petronella, in your section. So the first question is about the cost having skyrocketed. One questioner saying that they're planning to cancel their insurance and thinking about self-insurance. So do you have any views on that or any guidance on that? And somebody else asking, I think probably for the same reasons, do you know, is it possible to get health insurance that's a kind of one and done? So you pay a very, you know, presumably quite a high amount, you buy it once and it covers you for the rest of your life. Most insurers work on a year-to-year basis. And this it's not giving too much weight to say this gentleman, I think, is trying to de-risk premium increases over time.
Yeah.
And the third bit of that is, you lot to remember here, Petronella, but I'm confident you can do it, is does anything like that exist for long-term care as well, sort of bonds that you can buy? So these are great questions, because this market, for, you know, as we're living longer, these kind of products really, really are starting to come into focus, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, private medical insurance it's on the rise. It can be astronomical, and it is definitely worth shopping around. But of course, you've got these whole issues with underwriting, because if you've got pre-existing conditions and getting it covered, and if you've had serious health issues, perhaps a cancer scare or cancer treatment in your 50s and 60s, it's going to increase the premiums in later life. And so one of the things that we try to do is, if you look upon, if private medical insurance is affordable, you have the assets, it's about looking on it as an annual fixed cost. And building that into the cash flow, and building, you know, cash flow will also allow different expenditure to increase at different rates. I mean, if you've got, you know, in the early years, you're talking about school fees, you might have a 5 or 6 or even an 8% increase in inflationary costs, where and private medical insurance might be higher. So you can do different inflation rates for different expenditure items. So I don't know of any providers that's doing pre-funded private medical insurance. Haven't come across that. But the excess cost, this is something where the market is developing all of the time. One of the things I do say to clients is, you can tailor your policy. I mean, there's all singing or dancing, covered by every 5-star London private medical insurance hospital in London. I get that. But also you might say, well, look, if I can get treatment in the first 6 weeks on the NHS, then maybe that will help bring my premium down. Can I pay the first £1,000 of any claim? Because £1,000 may be affordable within your budget in order if you need to go and see a consultant. But at least it means if you need inpatient treatment in a hospital or an operation, then you might have that side of it covered. So there are ways to tailor private medical insurance to fit it around you. Just that often, you know, we kind of go for the all bells and whistles, and then look at and then obviously try to pare it back. But it's worth having that conversation about the excess, about what if you avoid the luxury 5-star hotels, I call them, hospitals in London, you can cut quite a lot of cost out. So it's about tailoring the private medical insurance to meet your precise needs. But once we've got a handle on what that is, then we build that very systematically into the cash flow to make sure that the customer can keep spending it. Pre-funded, I don't know. Long-term care is a different. It's kind of a different situation. I mean, with the high numbers, we are quite experienced in working with lasting powers of attorney people in care. It's not like one day you don't need care and the next day you're paying 90 grand a year for a very expensive London care home, or even outside London because of dementia, etc. It's a gradual increase over time. It's a need for more support. And we're very experienced at saying, look, you might just need your cleaner to come 5 days a week, or you know, you find a companion who's going to help you a little bit more, or someone to help you with your, you know, prune your bushes in your gardens, and etc. for your green juice, obviously, Mark. But the point is, you might just gradually need to increase help before you actually commit to a care home. But there are some very good annuity type products for care home. I mean, to give you an example, we had a gentleman, he's in his early 80s, with 300,000. We secured him 6 grand a month towards his care phone costs, index linked. He's actually still in care and thriving and doing very well. And he still has a substantial amount of his estate left. So there are products which allow you to basically take a lump sum of your capital and build in the cost of the care home. It works like annuities. You're swapping income, you're swapping a lump sum for a guaranteed income from an insurance company. It's definitely worth considering in those latter stages in your 80s and can be built into the plan.
Okay, that's very useful. Thank you. And to the questioners who asked about budgeting for care for later life, and particularly based on the situation for your late mum, I hope that's a partial answer there. Got a couple of pensions questions. First one, and Nick, I'll come to you, but I suspect this might be one that you both enjoy covering for a given value of enjoyment. I mean, we're grading on a curve here, right? Let's be honest. The first thing is, now bear in mind this is a recorded call, are there any instances where it is advisable to transfer out defined benefit pensions? That's a complicated little question. And a slightly more fun question, except not, is what about a potential change in government? Do you think if we do get a Labour government next time, we'll see the lifetime allowance come back in for pensions? But let's start with the defined benefit stuff. And Nick, I wonder if you might kick us off there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, our starting point on this would be it's probably not in your best interest to transfer away from a inflation-linked guaranteed secure income that's sort of gold-plated to then put that into a personal pension to then take on board investment risk. And I think the decision as to whether that is right for you or not shouldn't just be guided by the transfer value that the pension company are offering, although that can be attractive, less attractive now with yields backing up. But I would say that you've got to look at the fundamental reasons behind what you're doing that for. If that income that you're giving up, it was meant to heat the house and provide you with a secure income that you need for your lifestyle and your expenditure, then I would say absolutely not. It's probably not a good idea. If that income that it's going to offer you is surplus to your requirement for your living expenditure, and actually you'd rather have that money ring-fenced in a SIPP, which is outside of your estate for inheritance tax, and you've got other motivations there, then absolutely it can be the right thing to do. So it's important to go into this process understanding what the key motivations are, and then I'm showing you what the implication could be on you, for you. In terms of a Labour government, who knows? I mean, how do you answer that? I mean, I have had clients come to me asking to model certain situations of reversing the legislation to back how it was previously, this can get very complicated. And we're certainly not going to provide advice on legislation that may or may not materialise. So your guess is as good as mine, to be honest, Mark.
I mean, I'd come in here because I think having seen so much pension legislation changes over the last 30 years, the thing is what everyone's got to remember is that the lifetime allowance is pretty much eradicated from HMRC's pension rulebooks. It's actually disappeared in terms of this transition year. So bringing back rafts, it's not a question of they've rubbed it out and they're going to write it back in the legislation book. You have to create all new legislation again that brings in a lifetime allowance. Now, I'm allowed the UK, everybody to put more money into their pension and then say, right, we're going to go backdate it and say we're going to bring in lifetime. I mean, they could, of course they could, but you'd be doing a lot of retrospective work. And I think one has to look at the knock-on consequences within government superannuation schemes. They talked about a carve out. It's much, much more complicated. And I think when Sir Keir Starmer came out with that statement, I think it was slightly ill thought out in terms of the technology, the technical stuff that sits behind it. So we're not convinced that that's going to happen because there is a lot of restriction around pensions already.
Yeah, so you're not here to listen to me today, ladies and gents, but one or two of my colleagues are kind of involved in public affairs and regulation and that kind of stuff. And our assessment of it is exactly yours, Petronella, which is it's unlikely to be reintroduced, at least in the short to medium term, because getting rid of it caused such a lot of disruption. It actually pretty badly managed the way it happened. So it's probably there. It isn't to say that Labour administration would leave pensions alone completely. But my guy's assessment is you're more likely to see potential changes in the way pensions might be treated on death.
Yep, potentially.
As something that they might futz around with a little bit before getting back into the areas we've discussed there. We've got a couple of questions about the parameters of cash flow modeling and what you can do with it and so on. Is this something people can do themselves, or is it something that they need to work with you to achieve?
Nick, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Is it something you can do yourselves? Yeah, I would say you probably need training for the software. Is pretty complicated. I would say you can do it, but if you get it wrong and you're inputting the wrong information and you're not understanding how the software interacts with it, and how it outputs the data, then it can be very confusing. It can actually draw some pretty dangerous conclusions for you, that you might go away and think, oh, well, I can spend this much in retirement. Actually, that's fanciful, because you've input the data incorrectly, or you're using assumptions that need to be tamed down. I mean, typically, I would say that if you are using assumptions, it's better to be more conservative than it is to go down the middle road. And so that means in terms of investment growth levels, be a bit more conservative in what's achievable, estimate what inflation rates might be potentially longer term.
Yeah.
And add an element of caution in there, because ultimately what that can do is, you're stress testing your plan a bit better.
And I guess part of what Investment Quorum clients are paying for is your experience and skills on working out what those assumptions should be, as well as obviously all the implementation and investment management and everything else. But from, I can't remember which of you said, I think it was you, Petronella, said you'd run thousands of these things over the years. And,
I mean, I'd add to that, Mark, just quickly, just that, what the cash flow doesn't do is you input everything and you press a button, it tells you what the answer is in terms of like the best way for me to draw on my assets.
That's a shame.
Tax wrappers in retirement. It doesn't do that. It lets you work that out yourself. So you need to be skilled enough and have enough knowledge to understand how pensions work, how they're taxed, to be able to check this and make sure that what it's outputting is correct. So there is I would urge caution if you're going to be doing this as a client.
I think another point to note on this is that when clients first go through the process, it's like you said at the beginning, there's just masses of data to kind of collect and get you thinking about. So it's a journey, which is why we like clients to be thinking about retirement really early. you know, kind of with 5 years running, you can start to allocate money to different wrappers, etc. And the cash flow is really key for that, because it might be that you think along this line, and as we know, life is really messy, right? We think it's going to go like that, and it doesn't. It goes like that, and it goes like that, and things happen. And often when we do the cash flow and we do the first round of kind of analyzing the expenditure, the client might say, oh my goodness, I forgot. Oh yes, of course, I pay 6,000 a year for my private medical insurance, as an example. Or it could be, I had one which was great, and I couldn't work out why their cash kept running down on their emergency cash and their expenditure. And then I worked out, actually, they were big cash users. And they were drawing a lot of money out the cash point, and we hadn't actually allocated. It was about 10 or 15,000 a year that they kind of used for cash and how they gave money to their kids, like, you know, money trees. And actually it was really distorting the cash flow, but it wasn't until we really start to dig into it and work with the client and we can work out where the area. So it's a journey also. It's, as Nick said, you don't push a button, job done. It's scenarios, and it's ongoing, because, as I said, life is really messy and unexpected.
Great stuff. I'm just looking here. I think we have exhausted our questions now, and we've been on for 50 minutes. So I think it's probably time to let people out. So I'll just ask for closing thoughts from each of you. Nick, I might start with you, please.
Closing thoughts, yeah. I mean, I would say start planning for retirement early. The earlier, the better. Don't leave it to the last minute. And secondly, I would say that this is probably the most important stage of life, the approaching retirement stage, to get right. And it's potentially the easiest to also get wrong in terms of planning. So, you know, make sure that you seek good advice.
Very good. And Petronella?
Yeah, I think like Nick says, I mean, I think it's, you know, you can't afford not to do it, you know, because if you get it wrong, you buy the wrong product. There were so many pitfalls and things to think about. You can't afford not to get advice. And I think one of the things that, you know, kind of in terms of what we do for our customers, for people out there, what we offer is come and talk to us first. We scope out all our work, whether we can really add value. Yes, okay, we might not be the cheapest financial advisors, you know, more Waitrose than Lidl, but at the end of the day, you can't afford not to get that advice. So come to us. Let us take a look with you. Let us see whether we can get you on the right track. We're very good at giving just basic advice anyway, if we think it will put you on a simple track. If we can't add value and change the outcome for you for a very successful retirement, then we'll tell you that at the outset. I mean, we're truly honest and transparent at all times.
Yeah,
great stuff. Well, I think all that remains then is to say to everybody, yes, you will get a copy of the slides later on. Thank you for asking that and for being interested in the slides, because I know the guys worked hard putting them together. Contact details right there on the screen. So if nothing else, scribble down the phone number and get in touch with Investment Quorum. I think I'm required to say that at least once during this presentation. One of the things I've noticed during this session is that normally during webinars, and I've done a lot of these with lots of people over the years, numbers decline during the session, and it has stayed rock solid all the way through here. So
everyone loves pensions.
I'm going to take that as a sign that, first of all, you all endorse heartily just how great a job I've done at hosting this webinar. So thank you very much, everywhere. Everyone, on the off chance that that isn't true, huge thanks to Nick and Petronella for being such engaging speakers. Thank you all for spending time in what I'm sure is a very busy Wednesday for you. Been an absolute pleasure to host you. Wish you a good day, and thanks once again. Cheers.